Tullamore Distillery is barley as well, a combination of malted and unmalted. So we've got very similar structures to the makeup, and I always say that you guys will use hops obviously to draw out a lot of flavours. Hops for us is really the distillation process, and in Ireland we triple distill our whiskey, so we're running it through distillation 3 times over and getting a really smooth liquid as a result. Would you refer to your beers as a smooth beer? Is that
depends on the beer.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any favourites beers? Like, I know it depends on occasion and what's going on. The one that's in front of you, like, I must remember. People are always asking me what my favourite whiskey is, and I never have an answer, but that's a good one. In case you didn't notice. Yeah, I hail from Ireland. I am Tullamore D.E.W ambassador. Luckily for me, I get to travel the US and talk about our whiskey. And on this particular occasion, we are doing a national tour of the United States, seeking out great do and brew pairings. So I need your help tonight. I want you to really take in what we're doing, what we're sampling, and I'd love to hear your opinions on the end of the evening as to what you like and perhaps maybe what you'd like to switch up or what you'd like to change. Who here is Irish? Oh, see, lots of people. I would say we are a small country, but we make a big impact on the world. I've traveled all over the US at this point, and I'm meeting people day in, day out who have Irish heritage or who claim Irish heritage. It's quite amazing. We only have a population of 4.5 million people. I don't know how this is possible, but apparently
it's the whiskey.
Our great-great-grandfathers were very, very busy guys and travel the world. It's in fact one of the reasons why we're here tonight, guys. This whole concept of pairing whiskey with beer. Some of you know it as a Boilermaker, maybe a shot and a beer, which is, you know, we're watching the football, that's great. For us in Ireland, we refer to it as a pint and a drop. And, or, you know, a do and a brew, as they say. And the Boilermaker is one that I will come back to in just a moment, because it has a really interesting story to it. But I'd love to get a little bit on the actual whiskey itself. Tonight we want you to taste our original, our 12-year-old, and our 15-year-old trilogy. So there are 3 really, really special whiskies, and 3 really is the magic number for us tonight, and not just because of the way I say it. Everybody slags me off when I talk about it being 3 times this and 3 times that, and it's a third this and a third that. We're not very good at pronouncing our THs in Ireland, so apologies, but you get what I'm talking about. So look, let's start talking about the whiskey, and we'll move on and we'll have some of the guys from the brewery here to talk about the beer. Tullamore D.E.W is an Irish whiskey full of character, full of smoothness. It's a really, really smooth tasting whiskey. If you pick up that first glass, moving left to right, mind you, Tullamore D.E.W original, we can take a look at it in detail and see how we feel about it. It is in a shot glass. I see them getting excited down here already. It doesn't mean that you should shoot it off in one go, alright? Let's approach with caution. Take a sip. Take it nice and slowly. One thing I've learned is how much you guys here in the United States love to shoot your whiskey and take it in one go. We never ever do that in Ireland. We like to drink slowly over 15 hours. You know, it's fine. We get there. We get there a little bit slower, but we get there in the end. And all joking aside, you know, drinking a shot, like my dad he's never drank a shot. He does not know what that means. because we always sip our whiskey. We savor it and we really indulge in it. And oftentimes we drink it alongside a beer. And there's a really good reason why we do that. Whiskey and beer share the same DNA. Alright, so we use the same ingredients to make beer as we do to make whiskey. Sitting in front of you tonight, they look very, very different, but at their core, they share the same DNA. We use barley, water, and yeast to make whiskey, and in fact, in order to make a whiskey, you must first make a beer. And what we do is we take that beer and we then distill it. And that distillate goes into barrels and it's matured over a very long period of time. And so that's the case for Tullamore D.E.W original. So when you take a sip, remember it's been sitting patiently in barrels for 4 to 7 years. When I say 4 to 7 years, what do I mean by that? Well, this Tullamore D.E.W original is a blend of 3 styles of whiskey. See, there's number 3 again, I told you. I'm practicing the THs, but bear with me. The 3 styles of whiskey are malt whiskey, pot still whiskey, and grain whiskey. We make those 3 styles separately, we mature them separately, and then at the end of their maturation process, we pull them together, we blend them, or we marry them, as it's the term that's used at the distillery, and then it goes into the bottle. And what you have in front of you is the result of that. So let's raise a glass, take that sip, as I said, and what you'll find is the 3 styles of whiskey, they hit your palate in 3 different areas. So the front of your tongue, if you take like a teardrop amount onto the front of your tongue, what you'll find is that it hits you and it's very, very sweet. That's coming from the grain whiskey. At the middle of the palate, about halfway back, you'll find it's very, very fruity, almost like a green apple note. And then at the very back of the mouth, as it's going down, what you'll have is like a spicy note, a light spice note. And that is the triple blend of Tullamore D.E.W. It's what makes it different actually to other Irish whiskies. Most other Irish whiskies that you will have encountered here in the US are double blends. Tullamore D.E.W uses all 3 styles that are made in Ireland, as I mentioned: grain whiskey, malt whiskey, and pot still whiskey. So that's what you're tasting as you sip Tullamore D.E.W original. So yeah, let's drink to that. Raise a glass. There should always be a toast with every Irish whiskey. And I'm not forgetting about the beer, don't worry. There's a reason why we're pairing the 2 together. So get ready to sip your whiskey and then sip your beer and go back to sipping your whiskey, go back to sipping your beer. It's an art, alright? So glasses up, let's be happy, let's be loud, pour a glass of Tullamore D.E.W and make Ireland proud. Cheers!
I guarantee you people were probably drinking Champagne Velvet here back when it was originally brewed before Prohibition. So it eventually became one of the most popular beers in the country and died out in the 60s, and at that time they were making something like 200,000 barrels a year. So it was distributed through all the lower 48 states. But we wanted to reproduce the original recipe pre-Prohibition and before the time when American lagers became less flavorful. So this is a richer version. It's got a little more alcohol, it's got a little more malt character, a little more hop character than the beers that evolved from it and became your Budweiser and Miller and Coors. And really is as close as we could get it to what people were probably drinking in this very room over 100 years ago. So,
amazing. Thank you, man. Guys, as you taste it, you'll find the maltiness that they're really complemented here. And it's our objective, and we did work really hard at putting the pairings together for tonight, is that one enhances the other. In some cases, sometimes one will almost contrast with the other, but I feel for this first pairing, they're really enhancing each other. And that malt note is coming out really, really strong. You find the Champagne Velvet is extra smooth, when you incorporate the whiskey into it. So enjoy the pairing. I'll continue to talk, but look, let's make this an engaging conversation. If you have any questions or any comments to make, do raise your hand. Rather than me standing up here shouting at you, really appreciate it. Let's make this a fun event that everyone is involved loved it. So a little bit more on Tullamore D.E.W. and the history of it. Who here has actually drank Tullamore D.E.W. before? Oh God, Jesus. That's a lot of people. Alright, so you're well familiar, well accustomed. But I would love to inform you a little bit more on the story of Tullamore D.E.W. because everyone loves a good story, yeah? And as Irish people, we love telling stories. Most of them we make up, but some of them have some truth. And certainly the Tullamore D.E.W. story has a good foundation to it. Who here has been to Ireland? Quite a few, that's impressive, great. As I say, small country. Tullamore is a town in Ireland. In Ireland it's described as, you know, quite a large town. It's by no means quite as large as your fine town here. It has a population of 15,000 people. So that tells us it's quite a large town. It's right in the heart of Ireland. Literally when you look at the map, if you were to put your finger on the heart, that is Tullamore. It's in the county of Offaly, about an hour from Dublin. As you're travelling west, if you're heading for Galway to see the beautiful cliffs of Moher, you will pass through the beautiful town of Tullamore. We've been distilling there for quite some time. Tullamore D.E.W. as a whiskey was established in 1829. However, we know we've been distilling there for many, many years before that. In fact, any Scottish people in the room? Nobody is claiming that. You're wise. So there is a continuing debate on who invented whiskey. Was it the Scots? Was it the Irish? Obviously, the Irish are far, far smarter than the Scottish and invented whiskey. I'm only joking. It was kind of, you know, considered that it came from Scotland for many, many years. They had historic records which, you know, declared that Ishkavaha, which is the Gaelic term for whiskey, was being made in Scotland in 1495. So for many, many years it was always whiskey came from Scotland. However, quite recently, in the 2000 era, around 2007, there was excavations taking place in Dublin whereby a brand new, not so new, manuscript was discovered. And when they unearthed it, it was, you know, a lot of the detail of it was interpreted by the Trinity College in Dublin. And they found a reference to Ishkavaha, which dated to 1405, 90 years before the Scots can claim that they were producing whiskey. So only recently have we been able to officially say, yes, we have the oldest records of whiskey being made in Ireland. But what's even more interesting is that those records were created or made at a monastic site which is located about 12 miles from the town of Tullamore. So arguably, you know, we have a long-standing claim to whiskey being made in Ireland, and we know that distillation has been a part of the culture of the Midlands of Ireland for a really, really long time. So there's a nugget of information you can share with your friends at the weekend. Ireland has the oldest records dating to 1405, and those lads over in Scotland have nothing to go on at 1495. So a nice little nugget of history, which is always interesting to me anyway. But look, on the distillation side, the next whiskey is our pride and joy. It is Tullamore D.E.W.'s 12-year-old Special Reserve. It is one of Ireland's most awarded whiskies, which is great. People give out awards all the time for whiskies and for beers and so on. But this one kind of speaks for itself. I never really have to talk too much about it, because when you taste it, you know what I'm talking about. It is a deliciously smooth whiskey, as our original is. However, it's a lot more robust. It's got that triple blend. The triple blend, however, has been aged for 12 to 15 years. So it's spent a long time in wood. And the thing with spending time in wood, as the brewers here at Upland know, is that you have to be very, very patient, waiting for it to be ready. And you know, a moment too soon, it's not quite right. A moment too far, and you've destroyed the whole blend. So it's with great care that we blend our whiskies and mature our whiskies. At Tullamore, we mature in bourbon and sherry casks. Thank you for the bourbon barrels, we really appreciate it. We started using the ex-bourbon barrels in the early 1900s when you guys decided to stop drinking. Nobody knows why. I still can't fathom why you decided to stop drinking.
Thank you.
But we did. We certainly make up for it these days. I think you do a great job. But yes, prohibition was good to us in a lot of ways. It was bad for us in a lot of ways too, because we actually exported a lot of Irish whiskey to the United States. And with prohibition, that was kind of cut off. But the advantage was that we got a lot of the ex-bourbon barrels, and we started maturing our whiskey in that, realizing that our triple distilled liquid worked really well with that kind of a wood. Meaning that when the barrels have been used, they're a little bit exhausted. And by being exhausted, they provide us with the perfect environment to provide those subtle flavours to the whiskey. And if you have whiskey left in your glass, again, we're encouraging you to sample the whiskey, sample the beer, sample the whiskey. But the 12 beer is a great one to learn a little bit about what maturation actually does. Alright, and this is a little challenge for you all to try. If you want to pick up that 12-year-old whiskey, place your hand over the top of the glass. I then want you to shake the glass so that your hand becomes completely soaked in liquid. You can shower your neighbour with the Irish blessing, as we call it. Shake it up, yeah. And then you've got the liquid on your hand, put the glass down, and then rub your hands together really quickly, alright? So what we're doing here is we're creating heat. The heat will burn off the alcohol. And what will remain on your hands is the true flavour of the whiskey. It will help you to understand the whiskey. Once your hands become sticky, pop them over to the nose and take a big deep breath. Isn't that beautiful? It's like the Irish aftershave or perfume, whichever
Hold your hands where
This is a wonderful way to learn about whiskey, and I mean this in all seriousness. You can do this with any spirit. It works particularly well on a whiskey that's been aged over a long period of time because the flavour is much stronger over 12 or 15 years. Yes, question. Equally informative is to talk to a brewer who has actually worked really hard on producing a wonderful sour beer. So let's diverge and learn what Adam has to say.
Hi, I'm Adam. Hi.
It's Tuesday night.
With our peach sour ale, and so this is actually the very first sour ale we ever released back in 2006, and this year it's a blend of several aged versions of our bases. So there's some 4-month-old beer, there's some about 9-month-old beer, and there's about a year-old beer in there. We aged it on whole Indiana peaches, so we get peaches from Huber Orchard down in Starlight, Indiana, and we hand cut those things apart and take all the pits out. We age it another 4 months on those fruit before we ever put it in the bottle, and then we let it bottle condition before we serve it. So anyway, we got a question from over there.
Can you describe the fermentation process in Champagne Velvet versus the
Who's that?
Sure. Who's that asking that question? Random guy over there. It's a really good question. He's asking about the differences in fermentation. So we're in the Champagne Velvet. We're using a really clean fermentation with a single yeast strain. It's a brewer's yeast, but it's a particular lager strain. With the peach, we're using a mixed fermentation. So there's several types of Saccharomyces. There's a wild yeast strain in there, Brettanomyces. There's several types of bacteria even. So over the course of that whole aging process, those various microorganisms are kind of stepping in at various points along the way and doing their thing. So they're going to be producing acids, they're going to be producing alcohols, they're going to be producing all sorts of flavors that they we either let kind of shine through on the end or get used by the later microorganisms later on. So it's really an interesting process and a lot more free-form than the fermentation process that goes along with the Champagne Velvet. where it's really tightly controlled. Yeah, and it's done at sort of a room temperature in a cellar with all these oak barrels in that facility that you guys were in earlier. So much different style of brewing, but much more akin to the way
What
things.
makes it sour?
What makes it sour? Thank you, random, really curious customer.
Somebody cut him off!
No, it's yeah. So I kind of touched on this in the tour earlier. Sour, we sort of throw out there as a catch-all phrase. Sour beers can be, you know, a little tart, a little funky. They can be really aggressively sour. We pretty much say something sour when it's gone through a non-traditional fermentation. So anything that's not just the typical Saccharomyces cerevisiae beer yeast. Directly what he may be asking about is some of the bacteria take those sugars and convert them into either lactic acid, acetic acid, malic acid, all these organic acids that impart a tartness to the beer itself. And over time, those acids sort of meld with some of the other compounds in the beer and really form a nice kind of round quality that I think sour beer gets over a long aging process. So, any more questions?
Yeah, before he says something. So, who came up with this? No, really, who came up with this pairing? Because you told me a 12-year-old whiskey
Sure.
with all its maturity, and we're going to throw a sour against it. I would have said, go to hell.
But
This is brilliant.
Well, you know, I think we've got some really smart people on both sides that were working together on this whole thing, and we really just tried to find things that kind of complemented one another. And so I think that you know, rich, developed flavors of this whiskey work with the really intricate, kind of complex flavors of the sour.
Yeah, it surprised me. Yeah, it's great.
Sometimes it's just synergy, man. You just start putting things together and it just works.
Okay, so you did throw it against the wall and saw what worked. Okay. Just check.
Alright, guys, thank you for the questions. And as you stated, two very unexpected things coming together, and I feel like that's kind of the culture of how we experience food and drink today. There's a lot of pairings happening, and we're seeing it all over the world, not just here in the US. It's about, you know, pairing whiskey with beer, pairing wine with food, and so on and so forth. And sometimes really, really great things come out of unexpected pairings. And the reason maybe for the sour beer being involved here is probably my personal love for a sour beer. So I personally feel it works great, but yeah, let you be the judge of that. We always like to say it's our due, it's your brew. Perhaps you would switch them around. Perhaps you would have the sour beer with the original. It's up to you. And everyone's palate is different, which is the beauty of this. It's fun, it's an experience, it's an enhanced tasting experience. Whereas that shot in the beer I mentioned earlier on when you're watching football, you know, that shot's gone and you're in a different environment. But this is meant as an enhanced experience where you're really thinking about what you're drinking and working to pair them really, really well together. So hopefully it's enjoyable for you. I will go back to the reason why we're doing this. We are on a Do It a Brew tour. In other words, traveling the US, as I said, visiting breweries and meeting a lot of interesting people. Really interesting. Someone would include the very interesting gas stations that we have to stop at as we're driving. I've met some interesting people at gas stations, and everybody thinks we've got free whiskey. It's a large bus branded with Tullamore D.E.W Irish whiskey. So we get like people clawing their way in, and we're trying to fill up with gas. So that's been really, really great. But guys, in all seriousness, I started out my career in this industry. When I say this industry, I mean the alcohol industry, working for a brewery in my hometown called Smithwick's Beer. I don't know if you know it. It's a great beer, and very, very cool that I started out there because my grandfather worked there, so they had an emotional connection for me as well. It's where I started out and it's where I started to love what this industry has to offer, and the guys here speaking tonight are really kind of an example of, you know, the passion that goes into doing this. It's not straightforward, and similarly, you know, Tullamore D.E.W, we're considered to be quite a big whiskey. You know, we're known the world over. However, when you go to Tullamore, there's a team of probably 10 or 12 people actually producing this whiskey, and you know, they are a very tight-knit family, and we have to kind of remember, you know, that there is great passion and craft going into producing this. And I use the word craft, I use it very loosely, but like your champagne velvet, you know, there's a certain art in making something that is consistent. It's really, really difficult to produce something consistently that tastes the same with each process, and that's really, really difficult. Just in the same way that when we go down the sour beer route, that producing something that's different and allowing the yeast to get to work requires a great deal of craft and a great deal of effort. So that's kind of what this whole tour has been about, is like meeting people that are on the same wavelength that we are. We put great care into producing Tullamore D.E.W, which is the same year in, year out. When you're aging for 4 to 7 years, that's really, really hard. Depending on the yields that are available to you, how the malt yield is, depending on how much it rains in Ireland. It rains a lot, and we have to try and, you know, balance that with what we're trying to produce. So it's really quite interesting, and while we are, you know, perhaps a whiskey that's known the world over, there is a great deal of intricate detail that goes into producing it. So on that, a reminder of why doing a brew is a thing. I mentioned the Boilermaker earlier on. Does anybody, are you very familiar with that term, Boilermaker? So, shot in a beer, yes, we know that.
Ireland, she doesn't know.
I'm not from Indiana.
Irish
The Boilermaker, well, it's quite interesting because I'm a bit of a geek. I studied architecture at university, and now I work in whiskey. My mother is really proud. But history really interests me. I think it is one of the reasons why I'm working in Irish whiskey, because there's such a great wealth of history behind it. But the Boilermaker is a term that's derived from a lot of Irish immigrants that came to New York in the 1800s. Because they had to. We had some very difficult times in Ireland throughout the 1800s, and many people emigrated. We had mass immigration. So many reached the shores of New York, as you know. And when you raise your hands earlier, you know, with your Irishness, it's due to that era where many people came from Ireland. And you know, many of those men, a lot of them were men, they worked in the locomotive industry, or they worked making boilers. They were Boilermakers. And at the end of a long day, and they were long days as you can imagine, they drank in the local bars. And when they drank in the local bars, they would order whiskey and a beer side by side. And I mentioned it's still a serve that's very common in Ireland. And the story goes that the Americans would come into the bar, the American bar, and they would say, "I'll have what the Boilermaker is having." And that is where the term Boilermaker comes from, and the concept of whiskey and beer, or the serve of whiskey and beer being enjoyed side by side. So here's to the 1800s, yeah? There's a great reason why we're doing this. It's not something that is just fun, because it certainly is that, but it's a very historic concept, and one that we're celebrating. So hopefully you'll enjoy celebrating with us. We should probably move on to the third whiskey. Are you ready? And there's a lot of trees going on here, so are you ready? This is Tullamore D.E.W Trilogy, and trilogy meaning the power of three. Triple distilled, It's a triple blend, and we use a triple cask finish. So really interesting. While we talked about the previous two whiskies being matured in ex-bourbon barrels, sherry casks, this one, we're doing this here. However, we have a finishing process in rum barrels. Doesn't that make you really, really interested in this whiskey? Rum being used here. You know, in Ireland, we're seeking really, really innovative liquids now. People are familiar with the age-old Irish whiskey, and this is our, you know, interest in what people want to see. They want to see different styles of whiskey. So there's a beautiful tropical note of Tullamore D.E.W trilogy. And might I add, it's a 15-year-old, so there's a lot of aging on here. It's very, very robust. There's a depth of flavour to it that you won't necessarily get in our original. When you sip it, it lingers. It's there for a while. Get to know it. Get friendly with it. It rewards you. And again, we're pairing it with a really, really interesting beer. So, very special treat for you is that the gentleman, I see you in the back, responsible for this wonderful stout. We're known for stout in Ireland. Mr. Arthur Guinness, but I think you guys have done a very, very impressive job on this one.
Thank you.
Let's hear more about it.
I'm Zach from Upland, and this Irish Stout is kind of the combination of about 10 to 12 years of me brewing this beer at home and trying to recreate beer similar to Guinness, Beamish, and Murphy's that I started drinking as were kind of my intro to craft beers.
12 years old.
Whenever I was just a wee lad of 17, I started drinking Guinness pretty regularly. So this beer, we ordered the malt from Ireland and got specific Irish Stout malt from Ireland, from Irish Malting Company. Some roasted barleys from Ireland, and then also a little bit of caramel malt from Ireland. The yeast is also supposedly from the Guinness brewery. But the interesting thing about this beer is that about a week before we brewed this beer, we pulled off a whiskey barrel full of porter wort from our regular porter beer and inoculated it with lactobacillus, which we also do in our sour program. And what that does is the lactobacillus kind of sours the beer and drops the pH, and then we blend that back before the boil. So it gives the beer just a little bit of a tartness, a little bit of complexity, and that's kind of what separates our Irish Stout from other versions. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What's really, really interesting is that we are thousands of miles away from Tullamore, away from Ireland, and yet the Irish malting company that Zach's referring to is actually the malting company that we source our malt from, which is really, really phenomenal. That the whiskey you're drinking there, the exact same malt has been used for the beer as well. So let us know how you feel about this pairing. Like I say, it's a 15-year-old whiskey, so it's quite robust. Similarly, the beer has a lot to offer. It's lingering, it's got a wonderful toasty note to it, and if you're really brave and your neighbour doesn't object, you can do this again and see how it goes.
That's one I would go into space battle.
So guys, I know I mentioned that I was the Boilermaker, and you know why it's a cream, why whiskey and beer are paired together, but while we can still remain geeky, while we haven't had too much whiskey, I would like to describe how we make whiskey, because I feel we talk about it a lot, and when I'm meeting people, I assume people know, but in fact, it's not widely known how whiskey is made, and it's quite interesting, and it can be really, really simplified. I mentioned earlier on, we first make a beer, we take that beer, and we distill it. But a lot of people do not know what distillation is. So I always like to describe using a glass. If you can imagine, this is a large copper still. We've already gone through a brewing process. So we've taken our barley, our malt, our yeast. We've made a beer. It's known as a wash in distillery terms. And it's about 7 or 8% ABV. And what we do is we put that into our copper vessels. So the large copper vessels, They're beautiful. They're like works of art. And we have a heat source at the bottom of the copper vessel. We crack it on, we heat up the beer. And essentially the beer starts to heat up. Alright? And what happens is alcohol will rise at a lower temperature than water. So the first thing to happen once the beer starts to boil up is the alcohol in the beer will start to travel up the neck of the still as a vapor. And what we do is we capture that vapor in a cooling coil in the neck of the still. It travels down where we condense it back into liquid. And that is distillation. And it can be very, very complex when you talk to a distiller. There's a lot of science behind it, obviously. But at its core, that's all you're doing. You're taking a beer, you're heating it up, and you're allowing the alcohol to rise off that beer, and you're capturing it and cooling it back down into a liquid. The key thing for Ireland and what makes us different to any whiskey that's made here in the US, or indeed any whiskey that's made in Scotland, is that we do that process. How many times do you think? 3 times. Yay! My job is just wonderful. Yeah, 3 times we distill. So we've done that once. We put the beer in, yada yada. We've cooled it back down. We then take that liquid, which is now at a higher alcohol by volume. We put it in there again. We do the exact same process. We heat it up and we allow the alcohol within that to rise off. And then we cool it. And it comes back down into our liquid. And then we do it one more time. And what that means is that each distillation provides us with a really, really smooth whiskey. So because we do it 3 times, we've got a wonderfully approachable liquid. And you get this very, very strong on the Trilogy 15-year-old. And it's got that kind of underlying dynamic to it, but yet it's got the consistent characteristic of being smooth. And that is because each of the whiskies we've tasted tonight are triple distilled. So very, very different to a Scotch, which will be double distilled, or even any whiskey you get here in the US, which will generally be double distilled. So it's one of the reasons why Irish whiskey is really popular, and probably why you all raised your hands when I asked you if you've had Tullamore D.E.W before. It's a beautiful liquid that is very, very approachable for a lot of different palates, depending, or regardless of your interests. So look, I think we're ready for one final toast. Hopefully you've paired this whiskey with the beer, as was wonderfully described to us by Zach. And yeah, this is my favourite toast. I use it all the time. You need a notepad to take it down because it's really long. But maybe you can remember. Alright, here's to stealing, here's to cheating, here's to fighting, and here's to drinking.
Cheers.
We're not ready.
Wait for it. Wait for it.
He is way ahead of himself. Alright, if you cheat, may you only ever cheat death. If you steal, may you only ever steal a heart. If you fight, may you only ever fight for a brother or sister. And if you drink, may you only ever drink Upland and Tullamore D.E.W.